Hey, this is Mike Diercksen from Proactive, and you're listening to the Building Bite podcast. Tune in as we spotlight our guest, Nick Caravella, Director of Growth and Industry Strategy at Avocado Construction Technology Services. Our episode today is focused on maximizing efficiency through construction technology. For more information on this episode and others, please check out the Building Bite at www.buildwithproactive.com. Welcome to the Building Bite podcast, a podcast for construction owners, contractors, and insurance professionals where you can hear from the experts on key topics to help you be successful. My name is Mike Diercksen, Manager of Marketing and Business Development at Proactive. Our guest today is a fellow podcaster and a thought leader in the construction insurance technology space, Nick Caravella. Nick's the Director of Growth and Industry Strategy at Avocado Construction Technology Services. Nick, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Thanks for having me today.
Yeah, really excited to dive in here. It was great to have connected with you out in the conference circuit and kind of excited to bring this topic to the forefront here. But before we do so, Nick, if you could maybe give us a brief overview for our audience, a little bit about your career, the path you're on, and kind of how you got to be at Avocado today.
Yeah, no, it's an exciting journey because I'm an architect by trade. I dropped the T, added an H. Now I'm an architect. My joke is that I hated submittals so much I made them my full-time job. And throughout my career, I was really involved in the American Institute of Architects. Got to talk to a lot of emerging professionals, see where the business of architecture was at, and realized there was a lot we could be doing better. And so in that, I started to come up with this idea that maybe I can make a better impact in my industry by working on the industry rather than in the industry. And so I was working in an office in Denver, now Wellegy, they were Davis Wentz at the time. And we were looking at different technology solutions to help us manage our business. I was running 4 restaurant projects that, they get done in 4 weeks, 6 weeks, really fast turnaround. By the time my accounting team could get us any data about what our hour spend was, the project was delivered and we either made money or we didn't. And surprise. So I ended up going over to the tech space, looking at how information we create can be used in delivering buildings, realizing architects kind of have that superpower of being able to start with a blank piece of paper and come up with the entire schematics for how something should be built. And really wanted to focus on how do we streamline data transfer across organizations. And what I learned working at that technology company is that we don't always need a shiny new tool. A lot of this isn't about technology as much as it's about the people and the processes between them. And so in doing that, I started to think of maybe it's not about this, maybe it's about how we use technology. And so in having conversations with some of my peers in the industry, Nathan Wood from the Construction Progress Coalition being one of them, he introduced me to Avocado, where they work with owners who are building large capital program and have a lot of data that's super valuable for their buildings. And so we work to come up with those creative technology solutions that they need because construction's complicated. We all have different tools, we all have different tech. And we got to get them to work together better. And so that's been my journey as I moved from how people move through buildings to how data moves through technology. And it's been a really fun journey because construction is just part of what we do. We publish these buildings that go on for lives afterwards, and operations tends to cost the owner more money than the build even does. And so it's like, how do we capture that value in the construction space to create operational excellence for the owner? Long winding road, but I think what's really cool about it is having come from the industry and worked at tech companies, it sets me up to be a good translator of what people need and how we can actually achieve it.
Yeah, no, that's a great way to describe it as well. So I guess diving right in, Nick, the topic of today is maximizing owners' efficiency through construction technology. As I mentioned at the top, we had the pleasure of connecting out on the conference circuit, and as you mentioned, Avocado is looking to maximize that data and the efficiency there and kind of bring owners along and expedite that. So could you give us a high-level overview, maybe a little bit more in depth about what Avocado is doing and how they're looking to accomplish that?
Yeah, so we work with technology partners and owners as kind of that creative partner that go between to help figure out the right approach to using technology. So whether you have a solution that you're using and maybe you're only using a portion of it, we can help build an assessment and figure out how to get more value out of that investment. We even do things like if you don't have an IT team, we can do managed services and actually become part of your team to help run different processes and keep that going for you. But the nature of the beast is really that construction's complicated. You doing different projects, you're going to end up having different contractors, different design teams. You might have your bench of preferred vendors, but they're all going to have their unique ways of doing things.
Right.
And so there's this aspect of data disparity that's always going to happen when you look at your portfolio and managing your buildings. That just makes it very difficult by nature to get a really good bird's eye view over things. And so we come in as a creative partner to solve those kind of business needs, whether it means understanding how your vendors are performing and providing them the right guidance to perform better. Understanding how your buildings are performing so that, if you're trying to do compliance or with all the different standards that are coming out today around ESG and decarbonization, how can we build data strategy to collect the information so you can report on it and show that you're doing the right thing? We recognize that, technology is a mass market product. And so it's only ever going to be 80% good for your business. There's going to be the things that make your business unique that tech is not going to be tailored to, because again, they have to meet everybody. So then we come in, either through MacGyver, spit, duct tape, or creative solutions to come up with that last mile of value from the technology you're using to help all your teams get what they need, and solve that have your cake and eat it too problem, where your vendors can use technology that they want to use and you can use the technology you want to use, and we eliminate the double data entry in between.
Well, that's it, and it highlights the point you made earlier about being a translator, right? You have to be a bit of a linguist to say, okay, I not only understand the problem, but I understand the different way the solutions speak, and you can kind of bring that all together and cohesively apply that, right?
Yeah. Well, and there's this aspect too of the nature of our work is contractual. So transparency is great, depending on who you're talking to. If you go to the legal team, maybe you don't want to be real-time transparent, because there's risks in construction and you want to be able to have those things. So there's aspects of the industry that culturally has to change around transparency and how we react to data. But by having good strategy and good process, it helps kind of highlight problems before they become emergencies. And this is stuff that happens not only during the build, but even afterwards in operations, where it's just hard to find the information you need. And you end up doing work on warranted equipment that you otherwise could have just had go through the warranty, or you end up having, the janitor comes in and cleans the floor, but they didn't have the MSDS information and they go and void the warranty on a brand new floor in your building. I mean, these are things that happen, and it's through the nature of people who are just trying to do their best and trying to do their job. And there's just so much, anybody who played the game of telephone in kindergarten, it doesn't work. And so construction's a miracle, which is really cool. And how do we enable our people who are creating these amazing things to alleviate the stress and do it right the first time?
Yeah. Well, speaking of that stress, I mean, so there's a lot. You said it's a miracle these projects get done and done in a way that is continuous and scalable, right? So if I'm an owner, what is it? It's got to be hard to know where to start, right? So what was it about that particular problem with the owners that kind of drew you to this space with Avocado to come up with these solutions that present them to those owners?
Yeah, well, I think the owners, they're in this unique seat where they understand their business best, and they know what their data needs to do on the back end. I think at the end of the day, the construction industry has a little bit of a hubris issue where we think construction is the one thing, but then we walk off at the end of the project and then we never look back. Sometimes we do the post-occupancy reviews and whatnot, but it doesn't really happen as much as you think it would in this industry. And so this aspect of turning these things over to owners, it ends up, as an architect, I've gone through plenty of plan rooms in the basement somewhere of a hospital and whatnot. You grab the one drawing, you think it's the right one. It's two series out of date, and you end up making a mistake because you're documenting off of an as-built that was incorrect because there was updates and they just didn't have good document control. And so there's that aspect of you can always prepare as much as you can, and that alleviates a lot of issues down the road. But because you're always hiring different people, it becomes the owner's responsibility to manage their information. Unfortunately, they're not the authors of their information. And so they're receiving all of this stuff in all of these different formats. which in this creates, the mess on the desk. And so by starting to own that process, owners can really start to get more visibility into the operations of their building. But then there's also the challenge of, if you own it too much, then you create burden on your service providers, and then that creates pain there too. So there's this happy balance that needs to be achieved between getting the work done and enabling good data to happen throughout the building.
Yeah, and you mentioned service providers. I have to imagine that if done correctly, this is a real positive to those vendor partners, right? Because
Mhm.
they're getting a more streamlined approach and saying, okay, it's easier to work with this owner because they've taken that ownership step in the data. But there's probably, right, like you said, there could be too much of a good thing, right?
Yeah, well, and in many ways right now, there's almost not the good thing. We look at different reports like Harnessing the Data Advantage that came out with FMI and Autodesk, and it's like 12 to 13% of a project manager's time is spent looking for information. And then when you think about the double data entry from managing information in my PMIS solution and putting it on the owner's PMIS solution and then communicating it out to the design team, who's then doing the same exact thing,
Mm-hmm.
you see all of this time waste, and then it's all being put on our early juniors in this industry where we already have a labor shortage, and this is non-optimal work. As an architect,
Mm-hmm.
I didn't want to do 20 minutes of submittal logging to do a 3-minute review of the submittal itself. And this burden isn't like the optimal work, and it causes people to leave. I left.
Mm-hmm.
And we keep finding ourselves at this shortage, and it's because the way we produce buildings hasn't really changed, even though the technology has been adopted. We talk about BIM, we talk about digital twins, but at the end of the day, it still goes back to drawings on paper that are printed,
Mm-hmm.
and like the methodologies aren't catching up with the delivery, and there's
Yeah.
so much room to create value, but we have to think about how we create with the new tools that are available to us.
Yeah. So speaking of those new tools, and you mentioned things haven't changed that much, right?
Mm.
Do you see any hurdles with that? If there's owners out there, I mean, how do you get them to kind of see this as the opportunity it is, and maybe change an existing pattern that they've been doing for years and years at this point?
So I think owners who have large capital assets, they know their building and they know their product. And I think
Mm-hmm.
come as an architect, there's going to be architects who are going to grumble at me for saying this, but our buildings are products. They are
Mm-hmm.
things we put on the street that people experience and walk around in. And if you're doing data centers, if you're doing labs, if you're doing infrastructure, power generating facilities, those buildings have jobs and they're supposed to perform those jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have maintenance teams who are maintaining those buildings.
Yeah.
And generally, as a design team, we're always told a way to be, don't be prescriptive. That's how you add cost to a building. But
Mm-hmm.
an owner who's savvy about their maintenance strategy and about how their buildings and their product performs, to me, is going to want to start to explore, what does it mean to be prescriptive? If we only
Mm-hmm.
put an HVAC unit that's made by one manufacturer, what does that mean for maintaining all of those HVAC units across our program? You only got to repair one type of car. It makes a
Mm-hmm.
huge kind of difference on the back end for you. And so there's this aspect of, I think, things that, design, bid, build allowed for options and creativity. And for
Mm-hmm.
one-off buildings, I think that makes a ton of sense, especially if you're not a savvy building owner. But if you have a building product that you're putting on the street and there's replicatability, like, you have to figure out what it means to deliver them quickly and be streamlined. And the more sameness you can have, it can help save costs all across the board. And that doesn't mean you don't innovate either. There's going to be new products, you evaluate them, you
Right.
change your portfolio as you go. But there is scale and consistency, and
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a huge missed opportunity in the construction space.
Yeah, I mean, not every office building will look the same, but every Dunkin' Donuts by design is built with an optimal efficiency that they found to reduce that
Mhm.
variables, right?
Yeah. But that's the aspect of the Dunkin' Donuts understands perhaps selling, and actually Dunkin', I was a client once upon a time, so they understand the selling of the donuts. They understand the
Hmm.
business of making the donuts and pushing them off to the street. they don't always understand, and Duncan actually, I think, does, because he had a wonderful kit of parts. But not every client I've ever worked with understood that, like, there is that science of delivering a product to the street.
Yeah.
And when you end up doing things differently every single time, like you walk into a Target, every store is pretty much laid out exactly the same. So as a customer, I know I got to walk to the back for electronics. I know I got to walk to the right for clothing, and I got to go to the left for the food market. And then there's always that one Target you go into that's flipped, and it is the most
Throws
confusing
you
thing
out of
in the world.
sorts. Yeah. My wife and I recently moved, and we got a reverse Target. So yeah, it's taken a little bit to get used to that. So definitely
Oh,
understood
man.
that. Yeah. Well, and hey, so maybe speaking of these examples, I think it always our audience finds it easiest to connect to case studies, to examples in real life here. So, are there any case studies that you could maybe share with us where you guys have helped an owner kind of demonstrate this optimal efficiency and kind of pull them to a place where they're pulling all in the same direction?
Yeah, there's plenty of case studies I think we can reference, and I'm not going to use the names obviously for their
Sure.
own competitive advantage that they gained for these approaches. But it varies by what they're trying to achieve. And so a good example is in the energy sector. There's compliance standards because the energy sector has to tie to the greater grid, so they have reporting that they need to do to the government. And so by figuring out how building assets perform and how they're supposed to hit these different benchmarking requirements, you can start to really audit your buildings and understand your building performance and then how they tie to that greater need, that job of the building again. And so there's aspects of, if you have a performance driven building, you can start to do that audit. You can start to figure out where you need to do maintenance because maybe a unit's underperforming. You can not get fined because there's these compliance standards you need to hold yourself to. And then with things like ESG coming to be and being tied to how financing for projects happens, collecting that data to show that you're making sustainable decisions for your building that are socially responsible and that you have good governance structure to ensure that all of those things are happening, that's all data. And so we really work with every customer to, again, kind of understand what their unique edge is and try and capture that value through the gaps that the technology has by solving it with people and process. Another example would be just like understanding the assets in your building. This goes back to everybody's just doing their best. And so, repairs happen on a unit, they don't get logged. There wasn't a process for it. And say an emergency happens in your building, and this has happened, with a customer too, where they lose access to a room. There was a power outage, something's happening, and they go solve the problem. And the as-built information was incorrect because something happened during the maintenance life cycle of that building, and now they're blocked out. They don't know what their solutioning is, and you have an active emergency. We talked about this. I was at an Infraday conference last year, and even another aspect of it is a tornado comes through your town. If you don't have information to back up the assets in your building, they were city of Montebello. They were red tagging buildings because they couldn't prove the structural soundness because they didn't have documentation. And so they're like completely losing assets that could have probably otherwise been salvaged, but because they didn't have a good data strategy or a good asset in place, now this is a tear down, a rebuild, and think of all that lost operation time that, maybe it was just hey, we got to go scrub things up, put the walls back up, and we're off to the races again.
Yeah.
And so there's all sorts of examples of this around the world that just go even beyond our company, but it really has to do is like the day-to-day stuff. Where are things falling apart because we just didn't have the information we needed to make the right decision at the right time?
Yeah, it's about intent, right? Intentionally doing the little steps as you go so that when the big change event happens, you've kind of done that. You've laid, you've built in that process that's going to account for those things, and you're no longer going, well, what I've got access to is 2 years old, and there's been, 8 updates since then, and so maybe we're wrong, and then it could cause that greater issue.
Yeah. Well, there's also the aspect too, like to make it human. It's like we'd all like to retire one day. And if you don't have your information organized, like the poor sap that has to come fill your shoes afterwards, because what are they going to do? Dig through the Post-it notes on your desk? No,
Hmm.
we need to like start to help the people fill in behind us. And I think leadership is getting more to the spaces that they understand this. Like, in order for me to grow, the people beneath me need to grow too. And that means I need to
Hmm.
help them grow wherever they're working on, be able to get the visibility that they need so that they can do things. And I think that's what's really cool about data is we can start to do things like pattern recognition, start to find best practices so
Hmm.
that that junior who's filling in for that senior who's left the industry 10 years ago because of a recession knows what to do because that those best practices are now cataloged. And we have this weird thing in this industry about intellectual property and like best practices, but they're all the best. I've worked at, I think, 8 different architecture firms. They're all the same everywhere. Nuances, but we're not all as unique and special as I think we think we are sometimes.
Hmm.
And by sharing that information and by getting good data models, we can really insulate ourselves from a ton of the risk and a ton of the heartburn that we have during our projects.
Yeah, well, I mean, Nick, this has been a great and dynamic conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time and kind of walking us through this. One thing we like to do, we like to ask our guests for three key takeaways. So if I'm an audience member, keeping in mind our audience is primarily made up of contractors, risk managers, brokers, carriers, owners, all the stakeholders within the construction process, really. What do you think those three takeaways should be given our conversation today?
Certainly. The number one, I know we're at the dawn of AI in our world. There's no substitute for good planning. And I think
Hmm.
one of the biggest things is understanding like how AI works and that our industry, 95% of our data is unstructured, which means
Hmm.
that we don't have a plan for that information. And if we don't have a plan for that information, AI is going to have a heck of a time doing that too. And so, if you really are thinking about the data revolution that's kind of coming our way, start to think about how you collect data, how do you improve your data quality, and how do you build good data culture at your organizations? Because the dividends are going to be huge once AI and machine learning really gets its teeth into our space.
Hmm.
The second thing, this comes from just coming from the industry. This was another InfoDay panel actually in Denver. But the great quote that I really loved from Denver Water was ask who else needs to be at the table. I think
Hmm.
we forget like construction schedules are faster and faster and faster. And so our
Yep.
opportunity to like look up and out is completely gone away in many cases, at least for the project team who's focused on
Hmm.
delivering and meeting deadlines. And so bringing in partners, people from the industry, like an Avocado perhaps, to come and talk to you about technology and innovation is a great way to let your experts stay focused on the jobs that need to be done while getting them the support to do the innovation that helps them do it better.
Hmm.
This was always a problem I felt as a BIM manager. I wanted to do all these tools, all these templates, all these things. I had to deliver my buildings. And so that
Right.
stuff gets backburnered and either someone else is gonna innovate or you're gonna do it. So if you want to be first to the table, find the partners who can help you have the conversations.
Hmm.
Um, and then going to that the BIM, always ask how your work impacts the work of others because then that's how we start to
Hmm.
manage the pipeline and delivery.
Right.
I would always start off my BIM execution plan meetings with if I can do an hour of work that saves you 10 hours of work, tell me now.
Hmm.
It doesn't, because that's where the teamwork happens. If
Right.
there's, and it's also where we'll start to see how BIM to VDC handoff starts to occur. Is if I can make my model better for you to estimate off of, and I can get better estimation that helps me not VC my value VE my entire building, I
Hmm.
think that that's a win. And so there's aspects of transparency that I think are available to us, but we're not talking enough about how my work impacts your work and how
Hmm.
do you do your work so that I can think about how my work feeds into that model. And that clarity, I think, is going to save a ton of time and get us much more accurate through project delivery.
Yeah, it's measure twice, cut once, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
understand how it's going to be created and implemented, and by doing that, if you could do it right the first time, you save a lot of time on the back end.
Yeah, and there's an economy of scale to this too. This is not right. Like if
Sure.
for every company, if you're a mom and pop restaurant shop, do the restaurant you want to make. You don't like, but think about it as a product too. You're not. It's not a replicatable product, but there's human experience you need to
Hmm.
consider, and that's aspects of why design is more going to be valuable. And I don't think AI is quite going to replace design because AI is not going to understand human experience like humans understand human experience, at least today.
Hopefully not.
Yeah,
I've seen Terminator, Nick. I don't want to get too far down that road.
Yeah. But I think there's that aspect of thinking about what's right for you and having good conversations, again, asking who else can be at the table is really going to help you make the right decisions for your projects. And what's nice, like what I always liked about being an architect in different verticals was, you might be an owner and your product, your design professional and your construction professional, they see that product over a couple different product lines. They see it across your competitors too. And so there's best practices. There's things that we can all be sharing and learning. And it's okay to go off the best practice path too. That's innovation. But having those conversations helps you kind of figure out what's right for you. And, no one ever figures everything out for themselves. Heroes do it with help. They don't do it by themselves. And I think, always be inviting other folks to the table.
Right. And I wonder if that ties kind of into the next part. So with the 3 key takeaways, we also like to ask for an action item, right? So if I'm listening to this podcast today, Nick, and I'm like, this makes a lot of sense. I think we should be doing this. Maybe we're not doing this. Where do I start, right? What's that first step that they should be looking to do? And maybe what's the right question to be asking?
It's a fantastic question because I think we can start with the end in mind. I think you always want to look at what are your goals here, and I don't think we always think about those critically enough. And when I was studying for architecture, I really had a great mechanical coach for that exam. And he said, if you're ever trying to optimize a building, pull up the data, see where you're spending the most energy, and figure out how to cut that first. Because if you can make a 50% impact to the 70% impact in your building, that's a 35% return. Like, how do you you eat the elephant one bite at a time? So figure out which bites you want to take first and know that this is an incremental process. The more data we collect, the more stories we can tell, and then the more knobs we can tweak. But you have to kind of like figure out what your goals are so that we can start to create time to value, because there is diminishing returns. There's things that are nice to haves. There are things that, it's going to sound really great, but then at the end of the day, it's not going to give you the business imperative. So there's no substitute. Planning is cheap. Design is cheap. It's once you build it, ripping the wires out is really hard. Yeah. So start with your end in mind, have the conversations, and then figure out where you want to start to take those bites that can make the biggest impact.
That's excellent. So, Nick, this has been such a good conversation today. Before we let you go, we always like to hit our guests a few rapid fire questions. So first one here real quick, do you think we're turning a corner as an industry when it comes to innovation? We talked a lot about insurance being a little slow, insurance and construction being a little slow to this, but are we starting to get there?
I think we are. We had a conversation on my podcast a while back, and there's still the hesitation to adopt technology, but the hesitation is shorter. And once people cross the line, they're much quicker to get on board. I do think, though, that it's still slow. It's not, for someone who, wants to digitize and find digital transformation, we're about halfway there from a Dodge report we've done. So still work to be done. But I think there's some real imperatives on our horizon as an industry that's going to change things. Labor shortage being one of them. If we are not going to be able to build buildings with people, welcome prefab and modular revolution into the industry. With prefab and modular and the introduction of a true kit of parts design into the construction space, it's going to change the way labor is needed. It's also going to change the way we design buildings. And this is where iterative AI, machine learning, and model development starts to actually get some real legs in our space. So I see it coming. And I don't think that, I think there's going to be people who innovate ahead of the curve. But I think that there's going to actually be business challenges in our near future, especially around the labor gap, that's going to create a true imperative for changing the way we deliver. And I think that that's exciting. Design has always been about identifying the challenges and then figuring out the next way forward. So it's a good problem to have.
Yeah, certainly. Well, speaking of that, is there something that keeps you up at night professionally? Like what's one of the risks or challenges that you're seeing that maybe stands out above the rest?
I think it's different by sector,
Mm-hmm.
or by concentration. But when I always try to boil things down to the simplicity of it all, it's human conversation. It's
Mm-hmm.
understanding everyone here is trying to do their best. Mistakes happen on projects. It's not when the fan will get hit with or it's not if the fan will get
Mm-hmm.
hit with it, it's when the fan will get hit with it.
Yeah.
And so there's that aspect of how do we start to find ways to be vulnerable in the construction space so that we can share uncertainty, so that we can leverage the shared expertise of our teams to find the right solutions
Mm-hmm.
before the build. And I think a lot of that's going to be a culture change. Growing up on the East Coast, our love language is cursing. That's just how it happens to be over in Jersey at times.
Mm-hmm.
That needs to change. I want to, and I think I was blessed to kind of graduate out of college after the recession occurred. There's no senior PMs. I got thrown in the deep end, and being a junior PM who didn't know enough about anything, I asked questions. I allowed
Mm-hmm.
people to provide ideas, and I think wholeheartedly, my projects were more successful because I didn't know everything. And I
Mm-hmm.
think the more we can acknowledge that it's shared expertise that gets this stuff done, not any one individual, that's how we're going to take it to the moon or
Yeah.
Mars nowadays.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, no, Nick, this has been so great. And one thing we've asked a lot of questions today, but we certainly haven't gotten to all of them, right? So is there something that maybe we should have asked you about that we didn't get to? Maybe a plug for your podcast, another space for
Yeah.
our listeners to get information?
Yeah, so if you are interested in technology and how folks are using it and what's going on in the space, Avocado runs a show called Wired to Build. It's all about how owners are getting more wired to build using data behind that drives their buildings. And so
Hmm.
we're having great conversations, inviting a lot of people, and then also go to the industry shows, learn what these companies are up to, ask them the questions. I think you'll find that everybody's a helper out there. And
Mm-hmm.
so don't be afraid of shooting the note to the one person. Send me an email. I will probably respond. Um, it might take me a minute if all of you take me up on that, but I will probably respond. Because these conversations are what drives the innovation. We want to talk about the problems because if we
Yeah.
don't talk about them, how do we solve them? It's just like
Mm-hmm.
anything else.
That's a great answer. And so wrapping this up then, Nick, so this is the Building Byte podcast. That's building insurance technologies with the experts. You are today's expert. I know you're out in Denver. I've been there a few times. Death and Co. was always my favorite bite out there. But what are you taking the bite out of today? Where's the best spot to go in Denver?
So best spot that I take everybody to when they come through the city, there's this. It's called Super Mega BN. It's out in Rhino. It's Latin American dim sum. They come up with a little food cart. They got all sorts of appetizers. You get your kind of passport and you stamp away.
Mm-hmm.
All the food is fantastic. Their bar is well stocked. They have family size and tapas, so you get a little bit of variety, and it is just one of the most fun places to go to. They believe the chef is a James Beard Award winner too. Just awesome time.
Yeah,
It's a great
that's
corner too.
awesome.
There's a lot of fun stuff over there.
That's cool. That's a good. I haven't heard of that before, but we'll have to make our way out there soon. So Nick, thanks for joining the podcast today. If our listeners want to hook up with you, where can they find you? What's the best way to get a hold of you? I know you mentioned email, LinkedIn. What would that be?
Yeah, LinkedIn. So Nick Caravella or LinkedIn.com in link Nick Caravella, you'll find me.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably actually the best place to reach out to me. You can get me at nick@avocado.com. But again, if I get flooded, then I'm going to lose track of it all. So I do stay on top of social media. That's a fantastic way to reach out to me is on LinkedIn. And, excited to learn. Like if you're thinking about something, if you have a question, just want to rap with
Mm-hmm.
somebody about something, that's what I'm here for. That's what the growth and industry strategy is about, is just figuring out how we can kind of tackle that problem and help you grow. And me bringing my industry experience to the technology problem. There's a level of empathy I think that I have coming from the industry that, your average Joe tech person or your average Joe just construction person isn't going to have worked on both sides of that line to
Right.
kind of help connect the dots for you.
Yeah, being a translator, like we said at the top.
Yeah.
So, Nick, thank you so much for your time, and we hope to
Yeah.
have you back on the show soon.
No, totally. Thank you. And maybe we'll get you back on ours. So
That'd be great.
cool. Well, have a
All
good
right,
one.
thank you.
Thank you for listening to The Building Bite. This podcast has been brought to you by Proactive. Check us out on thebuildingbite.com, where you can subscribe to our newsletter and follow us on social media for all future The Building Bite news and updates. You can also find us on your favorite apps, including Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, and Amazon. If you have ideas for episode topics that we should cover on the show, or you know somebody who would be a perfect guest, let us know at connect@thebuildingbite.com.